Isn't she beautiful? The little Eureka Single Dose Pro? Not just because she's green, but also because she's such a typical little Eureka minion. Tilted slightly forward, specifically designed for single dosing to maximize retention as much as possible. That's a story we've examined closely, and of course there are many more as well. And the question that looms over everything is the new model better than the old one? What has been improved and how does the espresso taste this time? Enjoy the video. Yes, that's already quite stylish with the green. So, that won't influence our judgment. No, I don't get it. We bought this grinder too, as always.
But we were allowed to pick a color. We were there, visiting Eureka recently, which was a very interesting visit for us. And somehow, during this entire conversation and the process of ordering all the grinders we bought, the ones we were planning to test, this question just naturally came up. What color would you guys prefer to have on them instead? And Benjamin and I said, well, we'd really like Kaffeemacher green.
Exactly, and it clashes a bit with the table, but today isn't about the color. Instead, we've unleashed our detailed test protocol onto this grinder, or to be even more precise about it right now, we've unleashed Andrea and Gonzalo on the grinder again and conducted thorough testing sessions. We looked at the retention, we looked at the particle distribution, we looked at the noise level, and all of that you'll discover in this video. By the way, just like in more than 500 videos now, Michelle. So not just garbage videos. Yep, we're over 500 videos now. And yet, many of you still watch our videos but haven't taken the step to subscribe to our channel. Feel free to subscribe and, of course, like the video. If you have any questions or experiences related to waste, feel free to share them in the comments. Because that, of course, complements our perspective, since we've now looked at one of them.
Yes, we've tested one model, but there are updates available for this one, as well as for others, at least in certain cases or specific versions, which can improve functionality. And yes, we've tested all of them. I was under the impression that you'd brought chocolate. Yeah, I also thought at first if there's chocolate in it. These are all those Black Diamond burr sets that are available as an upgrade for the Eureka Single Dose. We won't go into detail here about what they trigger, what changes and all that. We have data, it's coming. So exciting.
Yes, it's really exciting. Let's quickly add just one more sentence to this section. Namely, I'd say, if we have a grinder like this one here, a single grinding disc has the potential to entirely revolutionize the entire milling process. Even more than, say, the size of the grinding disc. Can the geometry truly make a noticeable and significant difference here? That's genuinely exciting. But Michelle, today we're focusing on the fundamental basics of the matter. Let's talk about the versions, perhaps a quick glance at the pre-model. We examined it closely and it managed many aspects quite effectively. A super solid single-dose grinder, yet it also had a few minor weaknesses. On the one hand, for a single-dose grinder, it still has a relatively significant amount of retention, which can be somewhat of a drawback in practical use. And in this case, we can make a small correction to the data we had back then. We had specified 0.9 grams of retention, with 0.8 being temporary and 0.1 remaining permanently. We would aim higher today. We would suggest 1.5, 1.6, 1.7.
Yeah, probably 1.6, but just with higher permanent retention because, and this has been changed, we can already get this out there, the entire setup in the grinder is now completely new, fully redesigned from the ground up. That's partly due to the new burr design, but also because the upper burr no longer has any space or a gap to the lid on top. And we didn't factor this number into the total retention because it was already there before, but it contained ground coffee. For those of you who own the grinder at home, this is important to note. Every now and then, take the upper burr out. There's actually a bit of coffee stuck between them. Or with a fine brush or something similar, you can really get it out quite effectively.
That story was kind of so-so. It was pretty loud, or I'd say it leaned more toward the louder side. That's such a story. Then, Michelle, it still had that scraggly thing going on.
With Malgrat, so that was already the larger one you see.
Yes, but it's still pretty small. There's an upgrade available now, and it costs around 30 euros. And then maybe you have to consider that in the whole thing when you now see the grinders side by side. It costs 520 euros today or so, the previous model, plus maybe the 30 for the king-size Malgrat. Then you're at 550, and here we're now at around 650, so that's 100 euros more to begin with. And we're left wondering, is it really worth it?
Exactly. Let's start on the outside. What's happening? The first thing you'll notice is this new adjustment wheel. And I believe the greatest advantage is that we can now clearly display the number of rotations. So that means every time I make a rotation, it goes from 0 to 1 to 2 and continues on. I can effortlessly switch between filter coffee and espresso and see it on this display, which clearly indicates the current setting I've chosen to use right here. On this number, and I don't have 1 revolution, so I'm left wondering, how many revolutions was that again? It's super annoying, especially if you're planning to make this switch on a regular basis. I think that's a huge update.
It's a huge update and definitely the bigger deal right now because the other one was still small. And this is now 1 size larger. That's a completely different sensation and it has a very significant impact on the overall taste because the real question is if you've set up a recipe, gone away and then come back, will you still find the exact point? And we can confidently say, yes, much better than before. Much better, you'll return to the point more precisely now. We can confidently say this not just from operating the machine, but also from analyzing the particle distribution curves. When we pulled them, we compared the espresso on one hand, then shifted to other tasks, and upon returning, we're right back where we started. It's a truly satisfying outcome.
It's a lot of fun, this area as well. We've already talked about it in the king size wheel update, which is available for purchase. It's really enjoyable to work on. This number, due to what we simply have here in the larger area, the size is more or less the same. That means you can make adjustments to a number and stay within a few seconds, rather than suddenly finding yourself with a brew time that ranges anywhere between 10 and 40 seconds. You just glance at it and something immediately starts to change.
Yes, well, it has become more delicate. That's a lovely change. And in its outer appearance too. What about the bubble lid, Michelle, and what's the situation with the lid and all those details?
So the lid has become higher quality. There was also an interim update at one point. Do you think so? Yes, because I'll tell you high quality to low. Exactly, but period. All those who have the grinder at home, they're familiar with it because we had it in the academy at least 10 times. That this edge here in the first version was so delicate, it really broke off on almost all of the grinders among us who thought that it's the edge that snapped. And I totally agree with you, it's not really super high quality wood, but now, yes, and I'd say it doesn't break anymore. What still bothers me though is that we've now really seen a lot of single dose grinders, yes, like this one
that you have to fiddle around with it. Srenya, so when you get it to fit, I still think it's not well solved. Andrea's completely freaking out. Andrea is doing
all our tests together with Gonzalo, leads our home barista courses here at the academy, and he keeps saying, it's just so much easier today to get it right. I wouldn't call it inferior, just a bit more complicated.
It just doesn't guide you in as much. It's like you really have to tune into it properly.
Fix it.
It's new.
That's new, and I think that's smart. Even if you've worked a lot with the old version, it's a massive update that completely transforms the whole experience. Because with the old one, you had that metal base, and then you just inserted the cup directly into it. And that cup, it never really stood properly. It was kind of neither here nor there, not quite one thing or the other at all. A lot used to spill out before. And now, first of all, even though this cup is quite large, I think because it tapers so sharply, I find it really comfortable and incredibly easy to use for preparing and making coffee.
Great coffee.
It falls perfectly into the portafilter just as it should. Earlier we did a quick purge because there was still a small amount of coffee left inside. But when I give it a firm tap and pull it out once, it's completely empty. Nothing sticks at all. You don't have super extreme static buildup here, that's clear. We can already confirm that. With this grinder, you really don't need to use a water spray at all.
Yes, we can even back that up with data. So we can say we have the same deviation between the references from reference to reference. When we use ARDT, meaning we spray water droplets onto it, in contrast to when we don't, meaning the static charge is reduced to some degree. And consequently, it naturally spreads out less. But with this collection spout in place, we lose even less coffee, ensuring it actually ends up in the dosing cup as intended. And then it also fits nicely onto the portafilter.
And for the most part, truly, Andrea often shared advice, and I closely followed his tips. He has very often just worked with the cup. This here has 2 functions. First, there's a bit less crumb mess all around the edges. And it makes the acoustics about 2 decibels quieter.
Yes, that's definitely a nice bonus as well, particularly if you aim to reduce that noise and if you're brewing a coffee with a high Robusta content or perhaps a darker roast, then you'll have more static charge. And that could make sense. Also, When you blow, Michelle, there's always a tendency for a little bit of...
Though the cup is quite high and positioned very far forward, you really have a large portion that actually goes into the cup. That was well designed. But you said earlier, regardless of whether with water spray or without, roughly the same amount comes out. How much comes out then? If I put 18 grams in here, do I get 18 grams back out?
You get 18 grams out, yes. Consistently 18 grams back out. When you use misting, you always get a bit more. But otherwise, you're at 17.9 or 18 when you put 18 in. So this is truly top-notch quality. A deviation is completely effortless. We're at 0.04 in the deviations here, so particularly excellent in that regard. But my goodness, let me tell you this now. Should we take a moment to discuss the retention that ties in slightly? And honestly, it hasn't improved all that much at all, really.
No, the permanent one, as we've already discussed, has improved significantly, mainly because the upper grinding disc is now internally screwed, which makes a noticeable difference. Can we just go a bit deeper into that? What remains unchanged is still the replaceable retention space feature. We always measure, on one hand, the total retention, which is permanent. In our definition, permanent is everything that we have to scrape out. For example, in a screw, for instance, on the drivers, but also what gets fixed and sticks to the flapper. This partly rubber, partly metal rod, before it makes its way down into the chute and continues further along. And the temporary part, that's really when we open up the grinder and just use the small brush to clean it out a bit, maybe turn it over and give it a light tap, allowing whatever naturally falls out to be included in the next grinding process. And there we are, just like before. We might be 0.1 or 0.2 grams less, but we're still holding steady at 0.7 grams. What has to be said clearly is that this was already a few years back, not something recent at all.
It performs very well when compared to a grinder that utilizes a bottom container. However, that's not the reference point. The comparison here is specifically centered around the framework of single-dose grinders. And the V6 also has roughly the same size, but most or very many excellent single-dose grinders, which then also perform exceptionally well in terms of retention during single dosing, tend to be in this category. They have 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. That's not ideal. Personally, I would have definitely wanted more precise adjustment steps in that case. You can blow however you want. You can also hear the manufacturer then said, yes, you have to push the thing in there, and we did it. That will then get 0.1 grams better.
Exactly. So if you want to reduce it by 0.1, 0.2, or even 0.3 at best, Eureka's manual suggests simply putting the coffee in, lift the lever once, let the coffee pass through, close the lever, press it down firmly with some force, let it run tiredly, and then during the process, it takes like 3, 4, maybe even 5 times, and then you hear this whoosh, a bit more comes out, and in the end, it's still around 0.7, which then stay in there. So for you guys, I just do this at home as a standard, always using about 3 or 4 beans, which I grind through once, and it works perfectly. I'd say that's roughly around 0.7, so about 0.1 to 0.2 per bean, depending on the type of coffee. And then you're finished, and you take your freshly brewed coffee. On the other hand, you could also express it as 0.7 per 19 grams.
Yes, it always depends. How often he drinks coffee now, how long it's steeping in there, and so forth. That, I would say, falls into the category of rather not so good. In other areas, however, they've made some interesting strides. What I really like still about the grinder, and what I think this really shouldn't be underestimated, it's very fast. So, as always, it was already fast. It's still fast. It has, for such a small grinder designed for simultaneous dosing, it boasts an astonishing speed. We're almost hitting 20 in just 10 seconds.
Yeah, that's really a lot. So there, you've got a super fast grind, which makes the entire process incredibly straightforward. With this build, it's just over 80 decibels at the front, 81 decibels. So it's really not loud at all. No, not in the slightest, really.
Not loud at all. So it's almost in the best category, under 80. Under 80. Would we therefore rate it even better then?
What I would also like to add is when the grinder is on, I've experienced this from time to time, I'm a big fan of coffee machines not being in the kitchen. It exists in various videos, I've mentioned it a few times already, but if you have a piece of furniture that's perhaps not the most solidly constructed, let's just put it that way, then you've got it simply because the grinder is already, well, it already has vibrations.
So, I mean, when you grind quickly, it's always the case. With a fast grinder, you tend to have more noise overall. Yes, true. That's how we see it now.
But there's this kind of vibration on the plate. And I notice it, for example, I was visiting someone over the weekend who had the older version placed on a stone slab. Then you don't hear it at all. But if you have it on a separate piece of furniture or something that's not quite as sturdy, then it sounds louder again, that's for sure.
What has remained the same, Michel, is the temperature rise. If we take 5 measurements, grinding every 20 seconds, then we climb, but we stay at an average of 32 degrees. And that's completely irrelevant for the flavor as long as we don't exceed temperatures of 38, 39, or 40 degrees. The speed is impressive, I find. It grinds there relatively quickly, so you could also easily use this grinder on the go, whether you're doing catering, need to grind coffee at various events, or want to quickly brew several different types of coffee in a row without hassle. That works without causing a significant heat-up effect here, even though the grinder is built very compactly. We've seen that with some compactly built grinders where the temperature has risen significantly higher. Let's take Eureka, for instance, a perfect example. The temperature really shot up, but in this case, you absolutely don't need to worry about it having any kind of negative impact on the flavor whatsoever. By the way, it's really fascinating to watch. Shall we have an espresso?
Yes, I was just about to say that. Speaking of taste, shall we grab a coffee?
What I really enjoy is that intensely pronounced period. Dark chocolate. So really, really intense. I'm totally calibrated right now. We're just after Easter. I only ate around 80% or more of the Easter bunnies.
For real? But I admit it once happened with chocolate.
And it's entirely composed solely of pure dark chocolate.
Yes, and still. A nice clarity in this specific particular aspect of the flavor. Into this marzipan-like flavor, accompanied by a pleasant sweetness with a cocoa finish that carries a nice bitterness, not giving me the feeling that I need to rinse my mouth afterward.
The body is medium, very soft, creamy, and wonderfully smooth in its texture. Truly an excellent espresso. Really well crafted.
Truly a very good espresso. I then brewed with 19 grams in our Kaffeemacher with 43 grams out in 26 seconds. So 1 to 2.3, give or take. Very tasty indeed. And let's be completely honest, a lot of effort and care has definitely gone into crafting this here.
Isn't that exciting? We're taking another look now.
Oh my God, a fresh wheel, a brand new cup, just let it be. No need to go and purchase it right now. I don't know either. If you already have the old one, it's a good grinder. No issue at all. But if the coffee is awesome.
But it's a different particle distribution. Essentially, we're working with the standard grinding burrs now. So we're not discussing all those other variants right now, but rather the classic grinding burrs that are built into it. And if we now compare this with the outcome of the earlier single dose version, then those are different grinding discs. So not just visually, that will also be noticeable, at least on one side, but especially in the results. They are different grinding discs, and I find that incredibly exciting because there's not much left to interpret other than that it has to do with these screw openings.
Yes, because fundamentally it's the same setup. They have a very close partner, which is Italo or Itamil, who produces the grinding discs for Eureka, part of the company. A lot has really gone into it because...
Yeah, well, they simply got rid of the holes entirely.
But... Yep.
So flowed in. Yeah, on one side, up at the top, there are no more holes left in the grinding disc now. You see what I mean? It's completely solid. I think that I'll just go ahead and say it. First off, how often have you actually come across or seen grinding plates that don't have any holes in them at all? That's one part of the story. And on the other hand, isn't it surprising how little we, but also others, talk about holes in grinding plates? then everyone completely freaks out when there's just a tiny edge chipped off their grinding plate. Yeah,
When the grinding plates aren't 100% on their own.
I think that's a completely different area than just taking an edge off. But here there are actually holes in it. And no one can really convince me that those holes are being cut properly there. There's always rubbing, always breaking off, and so on. And that naturally has an impact on the particle distribution. And we're seeing that massively.
Yes. And quickly, let's go back 3 gears again to clarify that point. Can you make an espresso right now? Yes, I'll make another one. But what's been done is the upper burr on the Eureka is fixed in place, so it doesn't move at all, as you probably already know. When we adjust the grind size, we're essentially shifting the pathway upward inside the motor, which allows the lower burr to move closer to the upper one for fine-tuning and precise calibration. To imagine removing the screws from the lower burr at the moment, since we've also seen the construction of the grinder and especially the alignment is currently so at the moment they can't. I have to be very clear about that. The upper burr, now here is an example, these are the all-purpose burrs. They don't have any screws anymore, or rather it's simply screwed in from the back. It's not rocket science. So just this simple adjustment made the main peak 80 microns narrower, which is quite a significant improvement overall. We always have these measurements, as you can see. There's the X50 value representing the average particle size, and then there's the fineness. From nearly 80 grinders, we've consistently observed that the narrower the main peak, the more it significantly enhances and directly impacts the overall flavor profile. And we know that with the latest particle samples from the grind, since we consistently use the same coffee, it has become somewhat narrower in principle, but it's still 80. Yes, so it remains undeniably and clearly significant.
Yes, I'd still argue it's not 80. Perhaps it's closer to around 60, if anything.
Exactly. That's precisely what I wanted to say about it.
That was the other harvest from the bypass and so forth. Otherwise, all parameters remain exactly the same. And if we now take a closer look, how was it with the other curves we examined with the different grinders and especially with the cheerful ones? We did comparison tests. Let's not fuss over 20 microns. Perhaps it's 80, but from my perspective, that's not the right or the important point here. You're speaking of the main view's breadth. We've grown much narrower there. We've primarily become narrower because overall, the proportion of particles has notably and significantly reduced over time. That means we're moving significantly further to the left, so we need to go further to the left just to still be fine enough. But we retain this beautiful narrow main peak and then we achieve a higher fine fraction. This is normal. We need to create more resistance. It's a different curve and it's a different taste. From my perspective, it's precisely located in that sweet spot. Interestingly, it shares a strikingly similar flavor profile with another grinder we've tested on multiple occasions in the past. So both in terms of flavor and what we're currently experiencing or closely observing in the curves of the D64. It's quite similar, Michel, and this is a very interesting field to explore both in terms of the fine fraction, the width of the main peak, as well as the median value itself, which adds a lot of depth to the analysis. And that's what I find so fascinating, and I would really love to have the opportunity to measure it right at this moment. What would have happened if the holes had also been removed at the bottom? But here, we can clearly observe that there's significantly less scattering overall. We've become much narrower, and that's extremely beneficial for the coffee. It was already good before, but now it's a whole new level with the standard grinding discs.
And there, you'd still have upgrade options. We'll dive into the specifics later to explain exactly what that means. But that's really super tasty.
It's really super delicious. On the other hand, it's not the slightest bit surprising.
No, not at all. Nope.
It's really such a no-brainer. It's astonishing how rarely we encounter it in practice, which is truly quite surprising indeed. And I think that's one of the key developments we'll observe. So there's definitely ample room for the grinder market to grow and improve as it catches up from behind. Yes, we can now support this on one hand with our data, and on the other hand, we can back it up in terms of taste. And it was truly worth it. Worth it. You're right. But that's the final conclusion. Is it really worth purchasing a new machine or grinder now? The other one is also a solid grinder, and as we've already mentioned, you can always experiment with burrs as well. But this is now a different grinder. And I would say, as it stands, it's definitely super interesting, especially for specialty, high specialty. So, yeah, it performs well in that framework. While the other one had more of a super broad focus, it still does. It still can I believe, but I also think it's particularly interesting for much more complex coffees.
Yes, and it gets even more exciting with the grinders.
Yes, exactly. That's a different topic, a different video. We still have quite a few things to discuss here, looking at my data now. I'd also like to hear from you. How does the overall handling feel to you in your experience?
I think the handling is good. I feel it has become slightly better. Of course, thanks to the wheel and certainly because of the cup. I completely agree with you and Andrea on that. Зрение это может просто. Handle one more step. Easy to end? I mean, you could just remove it. So, you likely still have 3 million units in stock and then it would be a straightforward change. Otherwise, it's a very user-friendly grinder. In the end, it's straightforward and easy to handle. So, switch on, switch off. The switch could be a bit larger. That's not really up for debate.
Great handling. Michelle, you're well known for prioritizing that taste still matters and so on. The most crucial consideration for you personally is the cleanability of a grinder.
Yes, well, it's simple. Delicious coffee only comes with regular, thorough cleaning.
We do understand that well enough.
Exactly. And that has obviously changed now. So, you really have to admit, I'm a massive fan of this new little wheel and everything's great, but it's almost impossible to handle in real-world situations. To access the grinding chamber without needing to adjust the grind size, theoretically, you could loosen the little wheel, then unscrew the bolt, and completely take everything apart. However, these countersunk screws are connected internally to plastic, which makes me somewhat skeptical when it comes to their overall long-term durability. I think I would simply, if I clean the grinder every 2 to 3 months, depending on whether it's light or dark, already every 2 weeks with a powder or with a grinder cleaner. But whenever I open it up, the result always ends up being just a bit messed up. Then I would just recalibrate it again so that the grinding point when the burrs come together is back at 0 and 0. And then we're back to it. Otherwise, it's simply a new grind setting. That's worse than before. That's why I'd personally rate it more as average rather than good or excellent, to be honest.
Thank you for elaborating on that. Is there anything else you'd like to share or add on this topic? For example, I had planned a longer chapter, but
I see. Actually, it was better before, but I believe the added value of the gear significantly outweighs that of the cleaning. Yes, you're tweaking the grind level.
that was the cleaning process. For that, we can also confirm it works just as effectively with the espresso potential, or would it even be considered very good?
I think I would still stick with good because the option, well, good due to the possibility of making updates, but they do come at an additional expense. That's why it's only good. With an RPM option included, I'd have even greater potential and more flexibility. But I think it's what, let me put it this way or phrase it differently, what the machine delivers as its standard output, that's actually very good. Apart from the temporary retention period, I should mention.
Yes, exactly right.
But I would theoretically have even more options if there were an additional knob here, making it possible to switch between 600 and 1400 RPM smoothly. Then it would be really great for me all around. If there's also a retention set at 0.2, it would gradually become quite tough for the market.
I need to say something. Perhaps we should add a new category. Because you see, I would have now said, with espresso potential, very good. With filter coffee potential, I would have then said just courage or medium. Because there I might want to experiment and play around with the speed settings a bit more. But actually, when I make espresso, I usually tend to stay with the standard setting. Yeah, I could try it again. True. The espresso was really great this time.
Yeah, at home I'm consistent, usually at 1000 RPM, except for filter coffee.
So when you look at the burrs and the espresso, it's an absolutely fantastic and impressive result. When it comes to the potential for other areas like other types of coffee, perhaps filter coffee and so on and so forth, I agree that a speed adjustment might still be nice, but not essential. The other grinding discs truly open up a completely new field of possibilities. One thing we'll be exploring in depth in a dedicated video because it's absolutely worth taking a closer, more detailed look at these grinders or the specific geometries of these grinding discs, but also with significant implications for various other grinder models that are compatible with them as well. That's all for here and today about the Single Dose Pro. Michelle, I'd like to highlight an important point in the end. One reason why I'm also excited about the grinder, about this development. It's a European grinder and it's fully supported by a comprehensive European service network. You have many specialized partners. If something breaks on this grinder, you have a point of contact. You might also pay a bit more than for other grinders, many of which come from Southeast Asia, and those ones often can't be repaired quickly or easily, unlike this one, which has dedicated support available whenever it's needed, making it a more reliable choice. And I believe that's truly a strength of this compact grinder, and it certainly adds significant value and appeal to it as well. And by the way, we've linked some great partners below that we can confidently recommend. They do a really good job, handle repairs well, and will check things out if there's any doubt, if the grind is clear and so on.
It's green. It stays here, so it remains in our film studio because that's really quite nice. It makes delicious espresso, and when we do machine tests, we can use it for that. As long as we've got that 0.7 grams of temporary retention, it's absolutely awesome.
I'll always check it every time.
Of course.
Take good care, enjoy your coffee. Bye for now, see you soon. Here, it's like you just can't win no matter what. She wants to be pampered and adored, so I go all out trying to please her, and then...
Yes, hello? I was gone so long, returned. We're together 2 weeks, then you're gone a whole week. I have to process that.
That's why you're being so snappy.
Shit, that's all going in the credits. Is Larissa doing the video?
Yeah, in the credits.